me something, Uncle Money?
Thank you. Welcome to another episode of Practice Prosperity. We talk a lot about finances on this channel, but we rarely talk about money and relationships. And that's where Q Boston comes in. She is a licensed professional counselor and she deals with this on a daily basis, talking to couples who are struggling with money, having different perspectives about money. So we're going to bring her in today, and she's really going to help us understand what are some of the struggles people have when they come together as a couple when it comes to money. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So to start us off with, can you please explain your practice and the clients that you serve?
Yeah, so I am a financial therapist and coach to couples. I work primarily with couples, but I have worked with individuals in the past. But I specialize in getting couples on the same page when it comes to finances, having stronger communication skills in order to problem solve, make joint decisions, and just overall have a deeper connection when it comes to their marriage. And I do that in the way of having them talk and discuss financial decisions and all that great stuff. So I've been doing that for, oh my goodness, about 12 years, give or take. And my private practice has morphed into several different things. So, for example, the clientele that I work with now is high net worth couples. And I'm starting to see over the last year or two, I'm starting to see a lot of my clientels become more entrepreneurial type of couples, where both of them are entrepreneurs, or at least one of them is entrepreneurs. And so that is kind of the direction that my clientele is going in as well.
So I have the privilege of talking to a lot of mental health professionals, and this is a new area. Can you please explain how you got into this area? How did you know this space even existed?
Yeah, so when I first started as a licensed professional counselor, I did not know the world of financial therapy existed. My background has always been in relationships. It's what drew me to being a therapist. I just love the dynamics of relationships. And so I was doing that for many, many years. And then my own personal history was I was, trying to get out of student loan debt. Yeah. And I had this plan of trying to get out of debt, and I would work the plan for a little bit and then fall off and work the plan for a little bit. And being a therapist, my thought was, okay, like what's going on here? I was very curious, right? I know what to do, but what's blocking me from actually say I want to meet this goal, and for whatever reason, I'm just not doing it. And so I started to really look at finances from that point of view. Like, what's the emotions attached to it? I say I want this thing. Do I really want this thing? Am I scared to get this thing? What does this mean about me if I don't get it or if I do get it? Right. And so that's what kind of led me down the path. And then I started to explore, okay, what's really the connection between finances and emotions? And that is when this whole new world opened up for me. And so that's when I started to look into, hey, I wonder if other people are having these conversations, whether it's with themselves or as therapists, are they having them with clients? And the question was no, not a whole lot of therapists was having money conversations with clients. And so again, I was like, oh, okay, well, this is new and interesting. And like with any new hobby, right? You just do this deep dive, and before you know it, I was like, okay, well, I think that this is something that I can really start to do. Once I started to understand my own emotions tied to money, I wanted to apply that into the therapy work that I was doing with individuals at the time, and then eventually brought that over to couples work. And I've been doing that ever since. There's something very, very interesting, challenging, and cool about watching couples have these types of conversations, and some do it well and some do it not so well, but after a while of doing the practice they do really well in the end. So I love doing it.
So let's start this conversation off on a positive note.
Yeah.
What are some elements that you've noticed that couples do to be successful with money or successful operating together when it comes to money? What are some of those positive things, some things that we should strive for when it comes to working together with money?
So I'm sure you hear all the time, right? Whenever you're talking about couples, right? Communication is key. Communication is key. And that is true. But I want to go a little bit deeper and really talk about what types of communication you should be having, or what communication really looks like, especially in this topic with couples. And what that is transparency. I would say that is the number one thing that if couples are on the same page, they're aligned financially, and they're aligned in many other areas in their marriage, it's usually because both of them are coming in being very transparent with one another. They're having open and honest conversations, even if they, it's not always about, okay, well, let's have this conversation and we can come to a solution right away and figure it out, but they're at least open to attempting to have the conversation. So transparency is the top one. Other things like having a shared vision is very huge. The couples that I see or I'm talking to, if they're on the same page, they know what direction they're heading in. It's because, again, it goes back to that transparency. They're very clear. They know what they want. And in addition to that, they're clear on their shared goals. So not only do they agree on the shared vision and the direction that they're going in, they are both in agreement with the steps in the process that it takes to get there, maybe even the sacrifices that might be attached to that. Mutual respect, I would say, is probably the last thing that comes to mind. Mutual respect in the sense of I've got my point of view or my perspective or the things that I want to do. You have your point of view and perspective and the things that you want to do. And I'm not going to criticize you for it. I'm not going to blame you for it. I'm not going to attack you for it, especially if they're different from mine. I want to hear you out. I want to understand. And I want to see how we can be here and how we can get here. And so that's what I would say are the top things. Actually, I lied. There's one more thing. Self-awareness. Self-awareness and between the couples is huge. And so going back to the emotions work, a lot of people don't really spend a lot of time thinking through how money is attached to their financial decisions. But if they can understand that for themselves and also for their spouse or their partner, that's probably half the battle is, I know that this conversation is going to be a little bit tough or difficult or bring up some insecurities or some fears. I can go into that knowing that, which means I can, while we're talking about it, I can also make sure that we're reassuring each other that we're on the same page.
I like it. So when I begin working with clients, the first thing is transparency. And that's tough for, if somebody's paying me to work with me. Now you want me to be transparent with somebody who I emotionally have feelings for. Any guidance as far as that transparency step, whether I have a lot of student loan debts, I built up a lot of credit card debt, I really don't understand money at all, like being honest to that point, like how are couples honest and reach that level of transparency with each other?
It comes with practice. And I would say individually, if a person is pretty open and honest and transparent in other areas of their life, it makes finances a little bit different. And if they're not, then it makes having those financial decisions a little bit tough. So first, it goes back to that self-awareness. Just have that sense of understanding with yourself. If you know transparency is a little bit tough for you, or if you really still want to have this conversation, if we go with the example of having a lot of student loan debt, and disclosing that brings a lot of fear or shame or some doubt or uncertainty, name that. It's okay to go into the conversation and say, hey, I want to talk about this. I know we've got to be on the same page with finances. I've got a lot of debt. I would love to get rid of it. I don't know what the plan is, but I do think that you should know about it. And then you just have that conversation there. But also keep in mind that, again, there's so much of the emotions that's attached to it. And if you can lay a little bit of, again, the blame, the criticism to the side and say, again, this isn't just about problem solving, but at least for us to start the conversation, let's start there. Let's just put it all out on the table. And then let's talk about how we feel about the debt.
I like it. You also mentioned that a shared vision, and there's nothing more powerful than two couples coming together with a shared vision financially. And before we started this conversation, I mentioned, sometimes a shared vision shifts. Yeah. So what if a couple comes together and they say, this is what we're going to do. They're both excited. 4 years goes down the line and somebody has a preference change, a vision change. How do you advise couples to handle a vision change? It's something that we both agreed upon. We signed on a dotted line, but now somebody wants to go in a different direction. How do you handle that? Because it could be emotional for both people.
Yes. So you just have the conversation. And I know I say that even like, oh, just do it. But what I mean is don't wait too long. Once you realize that, oh, I know that we've agreed on this thing, and now I'm starting to kind of want something else, really start to disclose that and bring that up and start to share that. And again, it's not about, I want to tell you this thing to get you on my side, or I'm telling you this thing so that way we can go back to the original agreement. But again, if the two of you are together and you're doing this together, ideally, that there should have been conversations along the way. So let's say, and we'll use two separate examples. If I am working with a couple and they're saying, hey, yeah, we agreed on this thing, and then 4 years later, they've just up and changed. Really? Or were there signs and indications, like, or what has been going on over the last year, 2, 3, 4 years that have led to this? Does this natural change make sense in the direction that the two of you are heading in? So that's one thing. Or the other example is, yes, we've checked in so many times over the last 4 years. I was kind of getting an indication that this person was going to want to go in a different direction. Now we're having this conversation. We don't know how to really piece this together. And so they're bringing me in to help them facilitate that conversation. The way that you do it, and this is what I tell couples all the time, if you're over here and you're over here, let's first talk about what the two of you agreed on first. Always start with where you agreed. Don't just start and focus on where you disagreed. So what was the original agreement? If we come up with the example of the original agreement is, when baby comes, the wife is going to stay at home and be a stay-at-home mom. Okay, and that was the agreement, and everybody was on the same page, and we talked about how this was going to be beneficial for the family. And then 4 years down the road, it's like, I kind of really want to go back to work. Okay, well, again, let's talk about where the two of you agree on what's beneficial for the family overall. What type of family structure do the two of you want? Do you want a marriage where you both feel as if you contribute, not just when it comes to emotions or roles within the marriage, but when it comes to finances? How important is that for the two of you? And then once the two of them can talk about where they agree, then we can talk about how does this decision impact that overall? And what does that look like? Do you transition back into the workplace, or do you just jump right in? And that part is going to be different for each couple. But at least if they know that they can slow down a bit and have this conversation together and make the decision together, and not just, well, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. They tend to do it. They tend to feel better about it in the long run. I'll say this too. This is a model I say with all of my couples. The destination isn't what makes or break a marriage or a relationship. It's the process or the steps that you take to get there. It's those little bitty things, the conversations that you have, the way that you have them, the way that you don't, or the conversations you don't have at all. That's the silent threat that erodes a marriage or a relationship.
And I think shared vision is so important. So I want to harp on it a little bit. And you mentioned something, those check-ins. Mm-hmm. If you don't mind, give us some like practical things or ways couples check in specifically around the vision of money, because I think that's important. If there are regular touch points, yep, so that we are kind of changing direction slowly together versus parting it and hoping we come back together. Yeah. How does these check-ins, these emotional vision check-ins look like? Are you seeing work?
Mm-hmm. So the shared vision and the shared goals go hand in hand. So like I said earlier, you have the overall vision that hopefully the two of you are agreeing on, but you also agree to the goals and the steps and the process it takes to get there. So that if you agree there, that naturally happens all throughout, which is why that's so important. That's when those natural check-ins happen. If you have a goal, if the vision is to, I don't know, let's say have $2 million at retirement, well, we know that 20 years now, if that's what we want 20 years from now, when we're talking about whether or not to go for a raise, whether or not to go for a promotion, do we want to move to a different city? When do we want to start a family? How many kids to have? That conversation is happening as a check-in for, if we make this decision now, how does this impact where we say we want to be? It's the couples that don't have even that type of conversation. They don't know where they're going, and that's why they get a little bit lost in the weeds. But the couple who is clear about the vision and how they go about getting there, that conversation, those check-ins happen naturally. Because again, it goes back, even if we talk about mom not working for a bit after baby gets here, how does that impact whether or not you're going to reach the $2 million in retirement? Or what are some other business ventures that the two of you have to consider? Do you max out retirement before she goes on maternity leave for a period of time? Those are the conversations to have. But as long as you are on the same page and in agreement with the vision and the goals, those conversations naturally happen. But when it comes to like how often to have those conversations, that's up to the individual couples themselves. Is that weekly, monthly, annually, every 5 years? That's up to them. But there are indications and signs along the way. Are you leaning in to have these conversations, or are you leaning out and avoiding these conversations?
So they say a lot, each member of the couple is coming in with their own baggage, things that they're dealing with and struggling with. And they may not have those communication or be open to share their vision openly. What if you're a partner, you have a partner, and you want to be proactive? What are some indications that your partner may be struggling with money, may be uncomfortable with your money situation? What are some things that you see that maybe I can kind of cut it off or be preventative versus reactive all the time?
So that comes up with avoiding the conversations or having money fights, or we say we agree to something and then one of us bails on that agreement. That's how you start to see, oh, there's something else going on. So when you start to notice that, although you're having money conversations, don't forget to have emotion conversations. What is it? And ideally, you know your partner well enough, but some people don't. You know your partner or spouse well enough. What is it that happened in their past, whether it's their childhood or when they were young adults or a huge financial struggle that they experienced, that's leading into this present avoidance or dynamic that's happening between the two of you? And that's the part to have the conversation about. Most people are coming into relationships and marriages with emotional baggage of all types. And finances are a part of that. And so depending on how a person grew up, and I say this it's not always about if one of them or both of them grew up in poverty or in low income. I see this with couples who grew up in very wealthy families too, and money was never a subject that they talked about in the home. And so they come in with a lot of this shame of not having a lot of financial literacy, right? I'm 30, I'm 35, I'm 40. I still really don't know how money works, and I don't want to say that. Or they come in with a lot of self-doubt or a lot of uncertainty, and that can bring up a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And so that's where you meet your partner or your spouse is at that level, right? Is, okay, I know that there's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt there, bad business deals or investments, or you just, squandered money. That's okay. That's the past. You didn't know really how to do that. We can do this together, especially if you're having this conversation within a marriage or in a conversation, a way of leading towards marriage. That joint decisions are so incredibly powerful. You don't have to make these decisions on your own. We can make this together. Two heads are better than one. So you have to bring me the information so that way we can tackle this together. We can problem solve together. So if you take it from a standpoint that the two of you are a team, the two of you are on the same page, the two of you have a common goal, you both are teammates, you're in the same corner, in the same fight together, that the two of you can carry this load together rather than, oh, I've got my stuff, you've got your stuff, I've got to figure out how to do this on my own. And then that's where you also run into the issue of, we're not on the same page. I'm working this plan and I'm working this plan, and we hope to meet in the middle. And what happens if we don't?
Yeah. And you leave a lot of stuff up to chance. And sometimes chance is not in your favor. In the world of Real Housewives, Tyler Perry, we hear the term infidelity. Okay.
Yeah.
In our world, we hear the term financial infidelity.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, give us a textbook definition of infidelity and how detrimental you feel like it can be for a couple.
Yeah. So financial infidelity is one person, and sometimes this happens with both people, even if they do it differently, where you're either hiding money, you're not disclosing important information around finances that you should be disclosing, or there's that level of secrecy, there's that level of hiding information, especially information that's important for the other person to know. So in a nutshell, that's what financial infidelity is. The way that it can be incredibly damaging to a couple is it actually, and a lot of people don't know this, it actually can increase PTSD or cause PTSD in the person who the secret is being kept from. And so a lot of times I'll get couples where, they told me that they had this amount of money and or this amount of debt, and then we got married and it turns out it's double that. And that now I can't sleep. Right now, this whole plan that I thought that we've had, we now have to restructure this plan in order to try and pay off this debt as quickly as possible or to tackle this. And now I've got a lot of anxiety. I've got a lot of resentment towards this person. I'm angry with this person. And it's just a lot of those things. And so the key to know whether or not there's some PTSD is, again, if there's those intrusive thoughts, if the person can't sleep, the person can't eat, now there's a lot of fighting and a lot of turmoil between the two of them. And the way to also know if there may be some financial infidelity happening within a couple is if the person would make a different decision had they known about that information, you know that you should have really disclosed that information and been a lot more transparent up front.
That's tough. That's real tough. And so, like, people, I think sometimes folks think it's cute. Okay, I just bought this purse without knowing, and I've kept it in the trunk. I bought this new sports car without telling so and so. Maybe they'll feel a little bit better. These new set of golf clubs, like, we almost, trivialize it.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of explain how important those things are. Like, that's not should not be trivialized.
Right. So it goes back to making sure the two of you are a team and that the two of you are able to make decisions together. Now, it's one thing if you turn to each other and you have a conversation and the agreement that you walk away with is, hey, if either of us is going to make one purchase over a particular amount, we're going to have that conversation, and any amount less than that, no big deal. We don't have to talk about it. So if it's $5,000, if it's, $5,000 and up, you got to have that conversation, and the golf clubs cost $3,000, no big deal, because that was a part of the conversation. But if you've never had that conversation before, those $3,000 golf clubs, that's a big deal, especially if you've had agreements and plans to do other things with your finances. And so, like you said, a lot of people do trivialize that, but it goes back to what was the agreement that the two of you came together on? What's the conversations that the two of you had together, and what are the goals? And does this purchase lead you closer to that goal or set you back from that goal? And you want to make sure that you're having these conversations again and making these decisions together, because if you don't, then you run the risk of decreasing trust and breaking trust between the two of you. And so when it comes to whether it's a purse that you purchase and you didn't say anything, or you're waiting, or shoes or golf clubs or whatever it may be, if it runs the risk of breaking trust within the two of you, it really shouldn't be worth it, because it's going to cost you more in the long run. That $50 purse, the $500 purse, the $500 shoes, however much it costs, it's going to cost you more in the long run. And it may even cost you your marriage if it happens time and time again.
What is your response if a partner hears that and they say, nobody can tell me about my money. I'm going to do what I want to. Either I work long hours or I make my own money. I should be able to do anything I want with my money that I earned. What is your response to a partner who may say that?
Yeah, sounds like you're still single within this marriage or within this relationship. That's my response. And then we go much deeper into that, right? So then the second response is, what's the overall vision that the two of you have together about decisions, about your marriage or your relationship, and how does this move you closer or farther away from that? Mm-hmm. If the two of you really are a team, there is no my money. Mm-hmm. There is no you can't tell me what to do. There's checks and balances here between the two of you. The two of you are paired together by choice to do this life together and to make these decisions together. And so it really is beneficial for you to have two heads working together on this and coming up with a plan or an agreement. So again, it goes back to what's the spending limit? Do we have to have a conversation about that? So that way there is still some of that autonomy within the marriage, but it's not, I get to hoard all of my money and do whatever I want and you can't tell me what to do. But it becomes more of this collaborative effort between the two of you, because what we know is that if there's one or two people within that marriage have that mindset that you can't tell me what to do, the two of you don't have a financial issue, you have a marriage issue. The two of you have to be on the same page. It does not work any other way. So if you want a successful marriage, there are some dynamics that both of you are going to have to give up, this single mindset, this single way of thinking, in order to be more of a we instead of a me and an
I want to dig a little bit deeper in that. I think that's interesting. The single mindset.
I.
We are single longer in our lives versus our predecessors. And it's a very individualistic culture that we live in now. Me, what makes me happy, all those things. Like, how do you recommend somebody reconcile that? I'm a single person. This is what makes me happy. Now I'm a couple. Now I have to almost give some of my cares and my desires as a tribute for us coming together. Like, how do you think about that?
So hard, right? Especially as newlyweds, or it's such a difficult thing. So you do it with practice, but you also keep in mind that what this thing that I'm now asking you to do, be a we instead of a me, that's a lot of risk. And that brings up a lot of vulnerability. So individuals who are very strong in this, don't tell me what to do, I get to do this, I've been taking care of myself for a long time, that's where we go to. So couples can do this together, but I tend to do this in my therapy sessions because I hear it a lot easier than maybe other couples do. So like if your wife or your husband says this to you, that brings up some defensiveness. Like, what do you mean I can't tell you what to do? I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but we have to figure this out. Now they're fighting. I hear it differently. I hear it as, this is incredibly vulnerable for you to depend on somebody in this way, especially when you've had to take care of yourself for so long, or in the dynamics of your own family, not only did you take care of yourself, but you've been the one to take care of everybody else. And sometimes working as a team or sometimes being taken care of feels unnatural to you, but doing it as a team actually is way more beneficial for you than doing it by yourself. And so that's where you go to. It's a lot of risk and it's a lot of vulnerability to start to shift that mindset from a me to a we, because you've got to, as a team, right? You've got to slow down. I've got to check in. I've got to turn towards my person. And I got to say, hey, I want to do this thing. And that person may say, no, I don't agree with that. What do you do with that? Right now, there's a bigger conversation versus, no, it's my money. I get to just make the decisions. And so it's a lot of work and it's a lot of practice. But if you do the work and if you really lean into it, the benefits of it far more outweigh doing it by yourself. And again, marriages were designed for individuals to come together as a couple and do the thing together. You actually make the strides a lot faster and a lot easier, but it takes time to get there. So a lot of the times the couples, especially in the beginning, they're tripping all over each other, so to speak. It's a lot of mistakes. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of stepping on each other's toes. And then it's almost as if out of nowhere, they're like, oh, wait a minute. There's this mind shift that has just happened suddenly, they seem like, right? Where, oh, I've just realized rather than making this decision by myself, I made this decision together and it was way better. This person came up with a better idea than I could have ever thought of. And that's when they start to see the rewards of it. And so then they start to take off from there.
I like it. So with older couples, there's this tough word they have to think about. It's called a joint bank account. The concept of either both incomes coming in or a portion of my income coming to an account that my partner now has access to is vulnerable, especially if you've been single for a very long time and making money for a while. How do you think about joint bank accounts, and what are the the risks, the pros and the cons of couples creating a joint bank account together?
I love joint bank accounts. I will say this, the couples that come into my office where they only have a joint bank account, they do much better quicker and they retain it a lot longer than the couples who are coming together with either separate accounts or this combination of a joint and a separate account. And so we know there's something about joint accounts, especially within marriages, and I really only recommend this in the sanctity of marriage, is that it forces couples to have money conversations in a way that separate accounts don't have to. If both of our paychecks are coming into this account, we then together have to decide, what do we do with this money? Do we and what priorities do we give this money? We've got to decide this together. And a lot of times nothing can quite happen after that until decisions are made. And so again, it forces couples to have these conversations. It also forces couples to really start to see and pay attention to each other's spending habits in real time, rather than a week after the fact or 2 weeks after the fact, or maybe we talked about it, but we didn't quite really resolve anything. Because the money is there, you both have access to it. If I spend an extra $50 and my husband can see it, we're talking about that in real time. Or if we both, this has happened, I'll even share this personally. My husband and I, we have a joint account, and just last month, we were supposed to make a payment and it didn't go out. And I was like, wait, why didn't the payment? Well, we never really talked about which one of us was actually going to make the payment. Okay. Now we know to have that conversation moving forward with this new purchase. And so again, it forces couples to say, oh, wait a minute, let's slow down. Let's make sure those check-ins that we talked about, who's responsible for doing this thing. And once that happens, that then naturally builds the trust within the two of them, because it's actually happening. Versus having the separate accounts where you don't know how much money is coming in, you don't know how much money is coming out. You're relying on me to disclose that information to you, and then you run the risk of what we talked about earlier, which is that financial infidelity. Even when you have the combination of the joint and the separate accounts, what I see can be really risky about this. It's one thing if both checks are coming into the joint account first, and then each person is making the decision, this is how much is going into our individual accounts. That's one thing. What we tend to see is, because everything banking can be done online, including paycheck stubs, we don't get physical paycheck stubs anymore. It's that direct deposit, where people can then do a percentage. Well, I want 80% of my paycheck to go into joint account, and I want 20% of my paycheck to go into a separate account. But if we've never talked about that, what happens if one person gets a raise, which is what I tend to see in my office? I don't have to disclose to you that you may never know how many raises I've gotten, because I've went in the back end and I've changed the percentage. And so all you see is roughly that same amount still going into the joint account, and my separate account income is just creeping up. And so again, then I have couples who, some of them are pretty new in their marriage, and some of them for 20 years have been doing it this way, and something has happened and now they're not quite on the same page. The connection is dwindling, and they're trying to figure out, well, where did we go wrong? And my very first question is always, do you two have a joint account or a separate account? Separate account. I see. Okay. This is the conversation that we have to start having. The two of you have to start working together, because that again forces the two of you to have these conversations.
I like it. Also speak on what I've noticed in my practice is, when you have joint accounts, you actually see your partner's spending habits.
Yes.
So I know if my partner is going to the bar more often than they used to. I know if my partner is doing XYZ activity, and maybe that could spark a conversation. It's a good indicator. They say, where your money is, so is your heart. So what you value is where your money is going to. So if you see a divergence of behavior, that can trigger a conversation. Speak on that aspect. On it's kind of, you're your partner's first defense against life when it comes to monitoring their money.
Yeah, right. You want to do this depending on the situation. If we're talking about going to the bar more frequently, you want to do this delicately. You want to do this with compassion, especially if you know what the direct cause is. Did somebody lose a job? Did somebody lose a loved one? Um, Emotional spending is a very real thing, and this can be a part of that too. If the spending is attached to emotion because it's attached to a loss or some other hardship that's happening in a person's life, then you want to do this delicately. You don't want to come in with a lot of blame. Why are you spending another however much money at the bar? We're not together anymore. Like, this is bothering me. We don't spend time together. You want to come with some understanding, because the reason why that's important is because you don't want to close the other person off. You want to keep this as open as possible, because again, the two of you are working together as a team. What works well for one is beneficial for the other. What doesn't work for one is, it grows the relationship or the marriage. And so if you can have this conversation with curiosity and openness, hopefully that then kind of lowers some of that shame and guilt in the other person, depending on the reasons why they're spending, is that the two of you can then problem solve together. We can have this conversation. Do you need to go into therapy versus going to the bar? Do we need to bring in more family members or people that that mentor you or that you feel very close to? Can we have that conversation with people outside of this marriage that we trust, in order to give you more of the support that you may need, that I may not be able to, for whatever reason, give you if you don't want to talk to me about it? These are things that the couple can problem solve and do that together. Also understanding, it goes back to that risk and that self-awareness. Depending on what emotional stuff I've got going on, if you going to the bar triggers me, it makes it then harder, for me to have that conversation with you. So if a couple finds that even with all the best intentions, it's difficult for them to have the conversation, they keep slipping into these money fights, that's okay. There's something else going on. Seek, professional help. There's somebody that can really hear these things differently and teach the two of you how to have this conversation differently and more productively. But just know you can have this conversation, but it really requires the delicacy, the compassion, and to do it sooner rather than later. The couples who, again, avoid those conversations, and now, rather than it's been a couple of weeks or a couple of months of going to the bar, now it's a year. And now we're looking more at an addiction rather than a habit, rather than this is something that was temporary and, a result of something emotional that happened.
Okay. So let's talk about a circumstance where financial infidelity has happened. They've spent money that we've agreed should be allocated there, or they lost funds. And the partner that has been wronged in that situation is really going through it. They've lost complete trust. Is there a way to reconcile that trust? Like, what are some steps if people have fallen off can get back together, that unison when it comes to money?
Yeah. So it depends on the level of the breach of trust. If it's if we're now looking at PTSD symptoms, you need a third person to help with that. The two people can't do that together. If it's a little bit less than that, I've lost the trust, I've got some resentment, I'm really hurt, I'm angry with you. And if it's happened pretty close to when the infidelity happened, that's a lot easier to kind of move through. And so you sit down, you have the conversation, we've got to be on the same page. This is where transparency is going to be key now and moving forward, especially for a certain amount of time. And it's going to be having all of those agreements, whether it's, I want to start seeing more of the bank statements. Do we do a joint account together if that makes sense, depending on what the infidelity was? Or perhaps do we now move towards separate accounts temporarily because I want to feel more protected? So again, this isn't just about the practical side of money, it's the emotional side of money. And that's what happens when financial infidelity happens. There's a slew of emotions that come up where the person who was wronged feels like they now need to protect themselves. And so if moving towards that separate account makes sense for them to protect themselves in some way, fine. But ideally, can we put a timestamp on this? Can we move towards perhaps the two of you getting back into a joint account? But again, that's so many factors are attached to that. But you want to have the conversation of what what do we need to put in place so this doesn't happen again? And then what are the steps that we need to take in order to rectify that? And that those individual things or the specifics of that is individualized to the person and the situation and the dynamics. But I would say overall, the top two things is, what do we need to put in place so this doesn't happen again? And then what are the steps that we need to take to rectify this? And not, again, just for the money. It's not about getting the money back or getting back on track with finances. It's about making sure that emotionally we're going to be okay. We can get through this together. This doesn't have to completely destroy our marriage. This can be a story that's a part of our marriage moving forward, but this is something that we can move through. But again, that depends on a lot of factors.
So when I talk to young couples, I let them know that there's going to be a period of time where one or both of you are going to be without income. And if this period of time extends, you say what?
I love that you have these conversations with people. I love this.
It's really important. And first of all, when you're planning your personal finances, that's something you think about. But there is emotional toll when somebody loses the income over an extended period of time. Kind of speak to that reality, because I see it a lot. Sometimes it helps when somebody echoes that. And also, like, what should somebody do when they're maybe used to their partner being a provider and they're not there no more for an extended period of time and maybe never will be again? Like, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah. So ideally, you know what's going on emotionally, not just in the moment, but does this trigger or remind the person or both of you of something that happened from the past, again, probably all the way back to your childhood, because that could be the stuff that's also happening. So for the person who has lost the job, or if that's the financial hardship that the couple is experiencing, what does that look? Is this the first time that they've ever lost a job? And so not only is the finances taking a hit, self-esteem is taking a hit, their sense of identity is taking a hit, their sense of self-worth is taking a hit. And if you can recognize that, then the behaviors that are expressing the low self-esteem, some bouts of depression, you can kind of predict what those behaviors are going to be with your specific partner or spouse. And so those are the things that, again, we sit down and problem solve for. It's not just about let's making sure that the four walls are okay, but emotionally, let's make sure that you and I are also okay. And so then that sometimes has to be a part of that conversation as well. For the person who is impacted by the spouse who's lost the job, again, the emotions that come up from that. Was there a period of time when they were homeless? Was there a period of time when there was some secrecy in the family of origin? And so then does that bring this up again too? Again, I say this comes up also with individuals who grew up in wealthy families too, when money was never quite talked about. And sometimes we had a lot and sometimes we didn't. Or if somebody grew up with a parent who was an entrepreneur, which money kind of ebbs and flows. And so again, that could shake up a lot of emotions. So this is the time to not just have financial conversations, but to also check in and have some of those emotional conversations. The fears, the uncertainty, it's okay to name that. Transparency is important. Let's talk about how we're feeling. Let's talk about if we can come up with a plan right now. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. And what does that look like temporarily and long term? But just know you both are experiencing a lot of emotions. That's okay. And a lot of times, what I find is that couples are experiencing the same emotions. It just looks different. You both are afraid, but one of you is continuing to spend and there's not a whole lot of money coming in, or the other person is isolating and avoiding the spouse because they may feel, again, a lot of that shame and guilt. And so the way that it expresses itself looks different, and the two of you may be fighting about that. But if you can remember, we're both afraid, and that's where this is coming from, then you can have a different type of conversation. Did I answer your question? I think I don't know if I started to go off track a bit. I was reminded of some other couples that I've been working with about this specific thing. And that's what it was for them. There was a lot of emotions and a lot of just low self-esteem. It was the husband who had lost his job and had always been a great provider. And it took a huge hit for him. And it was devastating for him.
Wow, that's tough. Now, yeah, I can see that. Now, what about the provider who feels like they're at risk of losing their spouse? Their spouse, maybe they feel like, hey, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for a certain lifestyle. That lifestyle is no longer here. Um, how do you handle that? Is if somebody has their mind made up along those lines, do you have to say, hey, I'll have to let them go? That's their life, their decision. Is there something you should try to strive for to bring it back together? What do you think about those things?
Yeah. So a person who is willing to leave because the lifestyle has changed was a person who goes back to what we were talking about before. It was a person who had always been single within that relationship or within that marriage. You probably just didn't recognize it. That person always had that me, I mindset. They had never shifted to a we. Um, and so then it's up to the person. Do you want to stay with somebody who continues to operate in a sense of single mindset? And or do you want to try and again bring in a third person? Because I don't think I don't think this couple can fix that particular thing themselves. Can you bring in a third person to help shift that mindset?
Mhm.
If you can, and if that works, then great. But there may come a time where you may have to make that decision of this will not, and again, it's not the fact that you don't have money anymore or a lower income that's causing this to erode. It's the mindset. The mindset shift never happened, especially if we're talking about that within a marriage. The mind shift to a we never happened. And if that does not happen, no couple can survive a marriage that way because marriages aren't designed for single people within it. Marriage is designed for two people to work together within it.
Wow, I like that a lot. How you presented that. You mentioned that you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and when somebody becomes an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur, things are different. You don't have a set two week vacation schedule. You do a lot of your leisure things in the middle of the week versus the weekends. Sometimes you work weekends. How have you seen couple manage somebody becoming an entrepreneur? Because usually they take a slight pay cut before they go back up. How do you manage that? How do you help somebody get mentally prepared for a spouse or themselves to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Well, it would be great if they came to me before they made the decision. That would be ideal because then we could talk about what did the agreements look like, what does the plan look like, what does the process look like, shared goals, shared vision, all of that. That never happens. So usually they come to me after the decision has already been made. The finances have taken a hit. Maybe the hit has lasted longer than either of them thought it was going to last. Um, and again, there's a lot of emotions with that, right? There's the financial insecurity, there's the uncertainty, all of those things. And now they're coming to me. So now what I have is a couple who, again, is dealing with a lot of emotions. And so that's where I'm going to start. And that's to say, let's talk about what the two of you are feeling right now. And let's talk about what you thought the expectations was and how that expectation hasn't quite been met. Because a lot of times what I find is the both of them, especially if they've had the conversation, sometimes they don't. Sometimes somebody either gets fired and then they've fallen into entrepreneurship, or they've decided that they're just going to do this on a whim, or they've jumped ship a little too soon and now they're kind of struggling. Is to say, okay, what did you think that this was going to be like? And you find that there are a lot of these lofty ideas, and either one of them never quite had a plan in place. And so it goes back to, okay, well, let's now start to build that foundation. Let's have a conversation about what you now expect this to look like. What agreements do the two of you now have? Let's talk about lifestyle. Do we need to go down in lifestyle temporarily until we can, make some profit, or until we get more clients, or whatever that looks like? Or perhaps you had a lot of money come in initially, and that's why you decided to do this venture, and then you two then went into lifestyle creep. And now we've got to change this a bit. And so all of those dynamics have to be discussed. And once they're able to put it all out on the table and now start making some agreements and some plans, and then they can work that, then that's when they start to see, okay, now we're working together as a team. We can come together about, some emotions, whether, I can already project that next month is going to be a little bit low, but we've got reserves. I want to talk to you about this. I want to reassure you, because I know that when you see the numbers, it's going to bring up some uncertainty for you. Because we've already talked about this, I now know how to predict that in you, and I can have that conversation with you, which works a lot better than, why are you so upset? We're going to be fine, right? And so teaching them to communicate differently is always great. The other thing that I always tend to bring up, going back to financial infidelity, this is the other group of couples where we start to see a lot of infidelity, financial infidelity happen, is with entrepreneurs. We have a joint account personally, but my business accounts are separate. And there's this idea that a lot of entrepreneurs have, that my business is completely different. I don't have to talk to you about my business. I don't have to tell you necessarily how much money is coming in and going out. Just trust that I can make it all work. You just got to trust me. You got to have that blind faith. And the spouse is over off to the side and, in the dark. They don't quite know what's going on with those finances. And so getting them to have those conversations again, whether it's at least setting the foundation, this is what this typically looks like. This is, money coming in, money going out, all of those things, spreadsheets, whatever that, however they really want that to look like. They can start having those conversations. And then once they start to understand the process of how the business is working, then usually what I find is the spouse is like, okay, now I understand it. I don't have to be as involved. But initially, because I knew nothing, now that's bringing up, again, a lot of the emotions of, secrecy. I don't like it, or hiding, or you're keeping me in the dark, or there's some resentments, or what are you hiding? Are you lying to me? All of those things. You can start to put those thoughts to rest.
Wow. It's almost a little bit of protection of yourself to disclose as much as possible.
Yeah.
We as humans sometimes have kind of like self-destructive tendencies. And that's where a spouse comes in, a partner. Now, is there anything about money and relationships that I may have missed or not brought up that you think is important for couples to know to be successful with money?
I think exactly like you said. I love the way that you put that, where disclosing more actually protects you. It's more beneficial for you. But we, like you said, as we're raised in this particular society, that you are supposed to be independent. You are supposed to be separate. You are supposed to be a leader. You are supposed to be this lone wolf within a pack, that you don't have to disclose. It's beneficial for you to say less than to say more. And again, that works great when you're single and you don't have to disclose information to your family or your friends. But when you are in a marriage, or if you're in a committed relationship leading towards marriage, you have to disclose a lot more. You have to be more transparent. You have to make sure you're on the same page with things, because if you don't, you increase the risk of leading ultimately where you don't want to be, and that's to divorce. A lot of times what I see is that the path towards divorce, you two set yourselves on that path before you even got married. And if you start to really pay attention to that and you start to set this up better, the outcome is way better in the long run. The transparency, the shared goals, the shared vision, being more collaborative, having that we mindset, having those check-ins, whatever that looks like, the frequency or whatever. If you can do that, if you can do this together, I always tell couples, you don't have to do marriage perfectly, but you do have to do it skillfully. And the only way to build those skills is to practice and to do it. If you can do this together, the outcomes are much better. Your marriage is a lot more beneficial. Your marriage has that deeper connection. It's exactly the way that we all dream that we want marriage to be. You can actually get it. But I think somewhere along the lines, we've been sold this idea that, oh no, marriage success is a fluke. It's about luck. And it's not. You can actually design your marriage to be to have a lot of emotional intimacy, to have a lot of connection, to be fulfilling, to be satisfying. And it could feel really, really good to be within that marriage. It's not just something that you're doing to help you meet this financial goals because two people is, having that dual income is much better than one. No, it's designed for the way that marriage impacts our health, our wealth, our longevity, our how long we live. It's a very big deal. And I wish that people viewed marriage much differently, that it could be very, very fulfilling and very satisfying on a very emotional level that most people don't consider until they do the work. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought that a marriage could be like this.
Like that. So, what is next for you and your firm? I love this concept. I see the need every day in my practice. So, what do you think is next for you and your firm?
Probably again leading more towards those entrepreneurial couples. That has been incredibly fascinating to me, and I think the more that with inflation that's happening, a lot of people are getting more of those side hustles. They've got the 9 to 5, and then they've got the 5 to 9 in the evenings. I'm seeing a lot more entrepreneurial couples, and again, because of that, I'm seeing a lot more of those financial challenges that's happening within the marriage. And I would love to be the person that brings that hope and that light, because there's a lot of couples that are, I mean, finances are within the top 4 reasons of divorce. There are a lot of people who are throwing in the towel because they don't quite know what to do. They've tried with as much intention as possible, but they just don't know what to do. And so I would love to just put my name out there a lot more, whether that's with social media or doing more interviews, which is why I appreciate you wanting to talk to me. Um, just being more of that hope in the world that finances can be solved. It doesn't have to stay this problem that continues to erode. The two of you can get on the same page with your finances. You can have better financial communication. Um, and so, yeah, I love all things couples, all things finances. I love seeing successful marriages. I love seeing couples happy together. Um, so whatever I do, it will definitely have some foot or stake in couples and money. That's what I see long term.
So, if there's a couple that says, I want that marriage she described, what is the best way they can reach out to you? Do you have a website? How can they get some of your content or utilize your services?
Yeah. So my website is loveandmoneytherapy.me. You can also email me at loveandmoneytherapy@gmail.com. I have a very infant, like a newborn YouTube channel, Q Boston on YouTube. And then I also have my Instagram at Q Boston. So you can find me on social media. You can find me on my website, email me. I would love to at least do a consultation with a couple. And then if I can get them in, just get them on the same page and be successful. And again, have the marriage that they really do want, that they deserve. I think everybody, if you're married, deserves to have a marriage that again is fulfilling and satisfying and makes you feel alive and connected and beautiful. So
Love it. I love it. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Q Boston. I think you gave me a lot of things to think about, especially being an entrepreneur, about how I can improve my marriage. And I'm sure you gave a lot of nuggets that people can take home. So thank you very much for joining me.
thank you for having me.
The more I know, the more money I can make.